Lighthouse Blues by Paul Jennings. Someone was playing music in the middle of the night. It sounded like a saxophone, maybe a clarinet. I could only hear it when the wind dropped, but there was no mistaking it. I shivered, even though I was snug in bed. I wasn't cold, I was scared. Stan and I were the only people on the island, and he was in bed in the next room. I could hear him snoring. So who was playing the music? It was cold outside and a storm was brewing. I could hear the sea pounding against the cliffs. I got out of bed and looked out of the window. All I could see were the black clouds racing across the moon, and the light from the lighthouse stabbing into the night. The music seemed to be coming from the lighthouse. I thought about waking Stan up, but I decided not to. He was the lighthouse keeper. He was a nice old boy, but I didn't want him to think I was scared. I was hoping to get a job as a lighthouse keeper myself one day. This was my first night on the island, and I wanted to make a good impression. I climbed back into bed and tried to get to sleep. Tried not to listen to the music. It was soft and far away, but it crept into my brain. It was like a soft voice calling to me. It was saying something. It was speaking without words. I knew I had heard the tune before, but I couldn't think of what it was. It was a slow and haunting tune. Then it came to me. I remembered. It was called Stranger on the Shore. Somehow I knew that the music was meant for me. I was the stranger. I had just arrived on the island. The supply boat had dropped me on the shore that very day. But who was playing the music? And why did it make me so sad? I listened more carefully. It was a clarinet. It was definitely a clarinet. And man, I'll tell you this, whoever was blowing it knew how to play. It was the saddest and most beautiful music I'd ever heard. Then the music changed. There was something different about it. Finally, I realized what it was. Another instrument had joined in. It was a saxophone. They were both playing Stranger on the Shore. It was so sad that I felt like crying, but I didn't know why. After a long time, I fell asleep with the music still sounding in my ears. The next morning at breakfast, I asked Stan if he had heard anything. "No, Anton," he said. "I didn't hear anything. I never do. But I know there is something there. Visitors to the island always hear it. Most people can't stand it. They get scared and leave. You're the third helper I've had this year. The other two left because of the music. They said it kept them awake at night. But the real reason, they were scared out of their wits." He looked straight at me, and he said this. He was wondering if I was going to run off too. He glared at me with one eye. He had a patch over the other one. He looked like a fierce pirate, but he was a really friendly bloke. He loved that island more than anything in the world. "Well, who could be playing the music?" I asked him. "And why can't you hear it?" He looked at me for a long time. He looked straight into my eyes, as if he was trying to see what I was thinking. Then he said, "Last boy that went up into the lighthouse one Friday night. The music always plays on a Friday night. He took a torch, went off to see who was playing. He was gone for 2 hours. When he came back, he wouldn't say anything about it. He just said he was leaving. He wouldn't speak to me. He wouldn't answer any questions at all. He just sat and looked at the wall. A week later, the supply boat came and he left." "You must have seen something terrible," I said. "You have any idea who could be playing?" "Put on your coat, boy," Stan said. "Come with me and I'll show you something." A strong wind was blowing. It was coming from the southwest. Stan took me along a track which ran along the top of the rocky cliffs. There were no trees. There was a wind too strong for trees to grow on the island. At last we came to a small fence in the shape of a square. Inside were 2 graves. Headstones faced out to the sea. It was a lonely, windswept spot high on the cliff. We opened a small gate and went inside the cemetery. I looked at the headstones. First one was engraved like this: Captain Rickard, 1895 to 1950. Lighthouse keeper from 1915 to 1950. Rest in peace. The second gravestone was not much different, but it had another name on it. It said, Alan Rickard, 1915 to 1960. Lighthouse keeper from 1950 to 1960. Rest in peace. Stan pointed to the grave of Captain Rickard. "He was my grandfather," he said, "and Alan Rickard was my father." Both gravestones had a small drawing in the corner. The one of Captain Rickard had a clarinet. Alan Rickard's grave had a saxophone. "All the lighthouse keepers have been musical," Stan said. "The captain played the clarinets. My father played the saxophone. I play the violin. You play anything, boy?" "Yes," I replied. "I play the flute." Stan and I walked slowly back to the house. The wind was blowing strongly. It flattened the grass and made my hair whip into my eyes. Stan had to shout so that I could hear. "I can't play the violin any more," he told me. "My fingers won't work properly. I have arthritis. The violin is in the music room at the top of the lighthouse. My grandfather and father used to play up there when they were alive. It was something they would do when they were on duty. I can't go in there any more. I can't bear to look at my violin." Stan's eye was wet. Perhaps the wind was doing it, or maybe he was crying. We walked back to the house without speaking. I didn't know what to think. Did the two graves have anything to do with that sad music? The dead captain played the clarinet and his son played the saxophone. But they were dead, and dead men don't play tunes. Well, that's what I thought. One day I decided that I would go up to the top of the lighthouse. I might find some clues. But I was not going in the night time, nor was I going to go on a Friday. Next day was Thursday. I told Stan I was going for a walk to look around the island, but I went to the lighthouse. I went there before. Stan had taken me up on the first day. I'd been in and seen the huge light that went round and round at night, but I'd not been in the music room, and had not been up there on my own. I pushed open the door at the bottom and went in. It was gloomy inside. There were small windows in the wall, and they let in a little bit of light. The stairs went around and around. Stan had told me that there were 20 turns altogether. I went slowly up the stairs. It was as quiet as a grave. About halfway up, I looked over the side of the stairs. It was a long way down. I felt giddy, sat down on a step and listened. Nothing. Not a sound. I was sure that I was alone. At last I reached the top. There were two doors. One led into the light, and the other the door of the music room. I tried the handle. It was stiff, but it opened, and I stepped inside. The room looked a little like a cabin in a ship. It had bunks against one wall and maps all over the other. There was a desk with a globe of the world on it, and instead of a window there was a small round porthole. Pointing out of the porthole was a telescope. There was a music stand and a small table. On the table was a clarinet, a saxophone, and a violin. I went and looked at the musical instruments. They were covered in dust. They had not been played for a long time. The violin had a spider's web inside it. I picked up the clarinet and blew it. A terrible noise came out. It sounded like a bullfrog choking. These instruments could not have been playing on Friday night. They had not been played for years. I had not got any closer to solving the mystery, but I knew that the music had been coming from that room. I could feel it in my bones. I decided to leave. There was something creepy about the room. It felt as if someone was watching me. Over the next few months, I was kept very busy on the island. I had to measure the rainfall and record the weather. I had to man the radio and listen for ships that were in trouble. And every night at 5 o'clock, I had to climb the stairs of the lighthouse and start up the light. I didn't go into the music room, and I didn't say any more to Stan about the music. But every Friday night, about midnight, the music would start. It was always sad, haunting music. I could never sleep while it was playing. It seemed to be calling me. The names of the tunes always seemed to have a special meaning, a meaning just for me. It was upsetting, but I wasn't scared anymore. But I still couldn't sleep on Friday nights. I just lay there, waiting for the music to start. And then I lay there, waiting for it to stop. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I wondered who was playing, and why. In the end, I decided to go and see. I made my plans carefully, decided not to tell Stan. I put fresh batteries in the torch and found an old baseball bat. The bat was just in case there was any trouble. Next Friday, I waited until Stan was in bed asleep. Then I stepped out of the house and into the dark night. It was cold and windy. The moon was hidden behind black clouds. Spray was blowing up from the sea, and the waves were crashing and sucking beneath the cliffs. In the distance, I could hear the music. It was coming from the lighthouse. I walked slowly, fighting against the wind, and at last I reached the lighthouse door. It was dark inside. There was no light in the stairwell. but music was floating down from above. I had heard the tune before. It was "Stay Away From Me, Baby," and I knew it was meant for me. But who was up there, and why didn't they like strangers on the island? I was scared. I didn't want to go up, but I forced myself. My knees were knocking together as I climbed the dark stairs. I went around and around. I was glad that I had my torch. It was creepy in there. The music echoed. It seemed to be laughing at me. "You won't get rid of me," I said out loud. "You won't scare me off like the others." I tried to sound tough, but I didn't feel tough. I wanted to turn around and run back to the house, forced my legs to take me all the way to the top. There was light coming under the music room door. The music was very loud. It was definitely coming from the music room. Suddenly the tune changed. Now they were playing "The Green Door." I thought of some of the words. They were, "What's behind the green door?" The door of the music room was green, and I wanted to know what was behind it, but I was too scared to go in. Whatever was in there knew where I was. Then the door started to open on its own. It just slowly opened. Couldn't believe what I saw. Started shaking all over. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I wanted to turn around and run, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't do what I wanted them to. The clarinet was playing itself, and the saxophone was doing the same thing. They were both floating in mid-air. Someone or something was playing them, but they were invisible. I was really scared. My knees were knocking together. I decided to get out of there. Then I thought about the two boys who had left the island. I wasn't going to be scared off like them. No fear. No ghosts were going to chase me away. I took a step forward into the room. As soon as I entered the room, the music stopped. The clarinet and the saxophone floated through the air and landed on the table. Everything was quiet. I went over to the table and picked up the clarinet. It was covered in cobwebs. It looked as if it had not been played in years. I picked it up and blew on it. A cloud of dust came out the other end. Something had been blowing those musical instruments only moments before, and now they were covered in dust. Ghosts. It had to be ghosts. The ghosts of Captain Rickard and Alan Rickard, Stan's father and grandfather. But why were they so unhappy? And why did they want to scare anyone away who came to the island? I decided to talk to them. I was still scared. I'd never met ghosts before, but it was worth a try. "Listen, guys," I said, "what's the matter? What are you trying to scare me away for? I won't hurt you or the island. I won't even touch anything in this room. Come out and show yourselves." Nothing happened. The room was empty and quiet. I could hear myself breathing. Then I started to feel cold all over. Started to shiver. They were in the room with me, but they wouldn't answer. I felt as if cold, cold hands were touching me. Cold hands from the grave. I let out a scream and ran for my life. I tore down the stairs and ran out into the dark night. And as I ran back to the house, the music started again. They were playing "See You Later, Alligator." I knew they were laughing at me. They thought they'd scared me off, but they were wrong. I was scared all right, but I wasn't leaving. No way. I got back to the house and went into the kitchen. Stan was sitting at the table with his head in his hands. He looked up at me as I came in. I could see he'd been crying. He'd been rubbing his one eye and his cheek was wet. "I've just had a radio message," he said. "They're going to pull down the lighthouse." "Who is?" "People in charge. The government. They've been talking about it for years, and I didn't think they'd really do it. They're going to put in a lighthouse that doesn't need a keeper. An automatic one. It'll just be a tall tower with a light on top." My mouth fell open. Stan would be out of a job, and so would I. We would have to leave the island. They just can't do that," I said. "They just can't." "Yes, they can," said Stan. "Coming in next Friday. Supposed to help them knock down the lighthouse." He looked very old. He didn't know what to do. He just sat there shaking his head, staring into the fire. After a while he spoke again. "My father died here. My grandfather. I wanted to spend my last days here too. Now I'll have to go and live on the mainland. They'll probably put me in an old folks' home." Suddenly I had an idea. "Wait a minute. Don't give up yet, Stan. We're not the only ones on this island, you know. We can get some help. We can put up a fight to save the lighthouse." Stan looked up at me sadly. He didn't know what I was talking about. I thought I knew why the music was playing. The two ghosts lived in the lighthouse. They didn't want it to be knocked down, so they played spooky music every time a stranger came to the island. They tried to scare them off. They didn't care about Stan. He was their grandson, and he loved the island. They knew he wouldn't hurt the lighthouse. That's why he never heard the music. But playing music on Friday nights wouldn't work. Not against wreckers. They would come in the daytime. It would only take one day to knock the lighthouse down. Then it would be gone forever. It'd be too late to do anything then. I had to talk to the ghosts. I had to tell them that I was friendly, but I didn't want the lighthouse to be knocked down, and I needed their help to save it. I ran out of the house and up to the music room. It was as quiet as death. The saxophone and clarinet lay on the table. Didn't waste any time. "Listen, guys," I said. "I know you are here, and I know you can hear me. I want you to show yourselves. I'm your friend. I want to help you. I don't want the lighthouse to be knocked down. I want to save it, but I need your help." Nothing happened. It was just dead silence. I felt a bit silly. Maybe I was talking to myself. Maybe there weren't any ghosts. Had I dreamed it all? Was I going mad? Then I looked at the clarinet and the saxophone. I knew I'd heard them playing. I started to get angry. "Stupid ghosts," I shouted. "Don't you know that this place is going to be knocked down? The wreckers are coming on Friday. We have to stop them. Stan and I need your help. Playing music on Friday nights won't stop them. We have to think of something else." Silence. If the ghosts were there, they weren't saying anything. "Okay," I yelled. "Have it your way. Let them knock down the lighthouse. Let them throw poor Stan out of a job. You won't have any home. You'll just be blown around by the wind." When I said this, I noticed something happen. Some drops of water were slowly dribbling through the air. They looked like raindrops raining down on a piece of glass. But there was no glass. There were two lots of them trickling downwards. At first I felt a bit frightened, but then I realized what they were. They were tears. Tears running down invisible faces. The ghosts were crying. I knew I'd won. The ghosts were on my side. That they didn't want the lighthouse to be knocked down. But they still weren't saying anything. Then I realized why. They couldn't talk. Ghosts can't talk. "Look," I said, "this is no good. I can't see you and I can't hear you. I want you to pick up the musical instruments if you're going to help." Very slowly the clarinet and saxophone started to rise in the air. And as they did so, the dust and cobwebs fell off. They were sparkling like new. Then they started to play. I recognized the tune straight away. It was "We Shall Not Be Moved." "That's the spirit," I said. "Now, you have to come outside. We need you to scare the wreckers off. You have to come outside to do that. In the daytime, in broad daylight." The music stopped. The clarinet and saxophone started waggling from side to side. The ghosts didn't want to go outside. "It's no good doing that," I said. "You'll have to come outside. You'll have to scare the wreckers off before they get to the lighthouse. They might blow it up with dynamite from the outside. A bit of music at midnight won't do the trick. Come on, come with me now before they get here. You can practice going out in the daytime." I walked out of the room and started going down the stairs. Halfway down, I looked over my shoulder to see if they were coming. They were. The saxophone and the clarinet were slowly floating down the staircase. They were bobbing up and down as they went. I couldn't see the ghosts. "Hang on to those musical instruments," I told them. "It's the only way I know you're there." When we got to the bottom, I looked outside. The wind was blowing a little bit. It wasn't very strong, only a breeze. I stepped outside and turned around. "Come on, you two," I said. "There's nothing out here to hurt you." I was wrong about that, but I didn't know at the time. They started waggling again. They didn't want to come out. I waved my arms at them. "Don't you want to save the lighthouse?" The clarinet and saxophone slowly floated outside. Then something terrible happened. They started to blow off in the wind. The wind was blowing the ghosts away. They were drifting off towards the edge of the cliff. I ran over to the clarinet and tried to grab it. My fingers went right through it. It wasn't solid. When the ghosts touched the musical instruments, they changed. They became ghostly. I tried to grab the saxophone, but the same thing happened. There was nothing I could do. They drifted closer and closer to the edge. Then both instruments fell to the ground. They started to slowly move along the ground in little jumps. I knew what was happening. The ghosts were crawling. They were trying to crawl back to the lighthouse by hanging onto the grass. The wind started to blow more strongly. I was worried that they might blow out to sea. "Come on," I shouted. "You can do it. Keep going, keep going." And they did keep going. All I could see was the saxophone and clarinet making small hops across the ground. It took a long time, but at last they got back to the lighthouse. They went inside. I tried to go after them, but the door slammed in my face. I opened the door and was just in time to see the instruments floating quickly back up the stairs. When I got to the music room, everything was quiet. The instruments were on the table, covered in cobwebs. The ghosts were nowhere to be seen. "Oh, come on, guys," I said. "I'm sorry I didn't know the wind would blow you away. Come back, we'll think of something else." But there was no answer. They were mad at me, and I didn't blame them. After all, I nearly got them killed, if you know what I mean. Told Stan about what had happened. He believed me. I didn't think he would. I could hardly believe it myself. "Yes," he said. "I knew something was up there. Thought it might be Captain Rickard and my old dear dad. But I didn't really know. I never heard of him myself." "What are we going to do?" I asked him. "How are we going to stop the wreckers? The ghosts won't help us now. They're mad at me." Stan shook his head sadly. "I don't see what they could do anyway. If they can't come outside, they won't be much use to us. We'll just have to try and stop the wreckers on our own." I went up to the music room every day that week. I begged, I pleaded, but nothing else happened. The room was empty and cold. There was no sign of the ghosts. I didn't know whether they would hear me or not. At last Friday came. A ship arrived at first light. It unloaded 5 men and a bulldozer. There was also a tall crane with a huge steel ball on the end. I knew what that was for. It was to knock the lighthouse down. The men set up camp down by the beach. Stan and I watched them from the house. "I'm going down to see them," said Stan. "You wait here. I don't want you losing your temper. Let me handle it. I'll ask them to go away. I'll tell them that we're not going to help." "That won't do any good," I said. "They won't take any notice. It's no good talking. We'll have to sit down in front of the bulldozer or something like that." "First I'll try talking," said Stan. "It's worth a try." I watched him walk down to the beach. He was bent over and he walked slowly. His white beard was flapping in the wind. Strong sou'westerly was blowing. I saw him talking to the men. He was pointing to the lighthouse and shaking his head. One of the men started waving his fists at Stan. I could see that they were shouting at each other. Stan turned around and came back to the house. "It's no use," he said as he came to the door. "They won't listen. Said they've got jobs to do. They've given us till lunchtime to get our things out of the lighthouse. Then they're going to knock it down. The only thing I want is my violin," he said. "Not that I can play it any more, not with these old hands. You go and get it for me, will you, boy?" I went up to the music room, picked up the old violin. I decided to leave the clarinet and the saxophone. They belonged to the ghosts. I decided to talk to them once more. "Listen, ghosts," I said. "I'm really sorry that you were blown away in the wind. It's windy today, so I know you can't go outside. But you must be able to do something. We need your help. Stan is too old. He can't do much to stop the wreckers. They're going to knock the lighthouse down this afternoon." I waited a long time, but there was no answer. In the end, I turned around and walked away. Stan and I were on our own. After lunch, the bulldozer and crane started up towards the lighthouse. It was a very narrow part where the track went close to the edge of the cliff. The bulldozer and crane would have to go past there. Stan and I sat down on the track. We held hands and waited. "I hope they don't run us over," I said to Stan. "They won't," he replied, but he didn't sound too sure. It didn't take long for the bulldozer to reach us. Big steel blades stopped just in front of our faces. The driver got down. "Get out of the way," he said, "or I'll squash you flat." "No," said Stan. "Not moving." His voice was shaking. I looked up at the driver. He was an ugly-looking brute, and he was big, real big. He picked Stan up with one hand and threw him out of the way. Stan landed on the ground with a thump. He didn't move. He looked as if he was hurt. "Leave him alone," I screamed. "He's an old man. Just leave him alone." The driver gave me an ugly grin. "Now it's your turn," he said. Picked me up the same way. I kicked and struggled, but it was no good. He threw me out of the way. 3 other men came and held me down. The bulldozer and crane moved up towards the lighthouse. The crane stopped right in front of the lighthouse door. The big steel ball started to swing backwards and forwards through the air. Then I noticed something. The wind had stopped blowing. Yeah, it was very still. I listened carefully. Yes, I could hear music. The door of the lighthouse opened, and out came the clarinet and the saxophone. They were playing "When the Saints Go Marching In." The driver of the crane couldn't believe what he was seeing. His eyes nearly popped out of his head. Saxophone and clarinet were floating through the air and playing a tune. He jumped off the crane and ran down the track, screaming his head off. The saxophone floated up above the seat of the crane. The crane started moving backwards towards the sea. One of the ghosts had put it into reverse gear. It rumbled slowly towards the cliff. But the ghost was still sitting on it. I could see the saxophone. It was still over the driver's seat. The crane started to rumble and tumble over the cliff. At the last minute, the ghost jumped clear. The saxophone came floating back. The driver of the bulldozer let out a roar. He put the blade up and drove towards the lighthouse. Stan jumped up and pulled one of the levers. The bulldozer turned and headed towards the cliff. Stan and the driver were both struggling over the controls. The bulldozer got closer and closer to the edge. The driver suddenly jumped off. Stan tried to jump off too, but his leg was stuck. The bulldozer tipped over the edge and fell. Down, down, down it went. Stan went with it. It tumbled over and over, and then it crashed on the rocks beneath. The ghost started playing louder and louder. It wasn't a tune. It was just a loud, roaring noise. It was angry and sad at the same time. Then both instruments fell to the ground. I didn't know where the ghosts were. Then I saw the driver rise up into the air. The ghosts were lifting him up. Then they suddenly dropped him. He fell onto his head. He let out a scream and started running back down the track. The other men followed him. They were scared to death. I went and looked over the edge of the cliff. The two ghosts picked up their instruments and stood next to me. I couldn't see them. I could just see the saxophone and clarinet floating in the air. I knew that Stan was dead. No one could have lived through that crash. The ghost started playing a sad, sad tune. I knew the first lines. They were, "We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again one sunny day." I looked at the grey sea. The wind was blowing spray into the air. The wind! "Quick!" I yelled. "Back to the lighthouse! The wind is getting up!" But it was too late. A sudden gust of wind blew both ghosts over the edge and out to sea. I watched as the clarinet and saxophone drifted away, getting smaller and smaller. They looked like two tiny leaves blowing in the storm. In the end, I couldn't see them anymore. They were gone. Well, that's just about the end of the story. Stan was buried in the tiny cemetery next to the other two graves. The wreckers left and didn't come back. Their union said that men would not work on the island. They said it was too dangerous. I was made lighthouse keeper, and I've been here for a year now. I love the island. I hope I can always stay here, but it does get very lonely, and I often wish that Stan was still alive. Last night, something happened. Something good. It was a Friday. I was just closing my eyes when I thought I heard music. It was coming from the lighthouse. I jumped out of bed and ran as fast as I could. I stopped when I reached the music room door. It was a saxophone and a clarinet, but something was different. I pushed open the door a tiny bit and peeped in. The clarinet and saxophone were floating in the air as usual, but there was another instrument as well. It was a violin. It looked as if it was playing itself, but I knew that Stan was playing it. There were three ghosts now. I smiled to myself and closed the door. As I walked back down the stairs, I hummed a tune to myself. I knew the song well. It was "Happy Days Are Here Again."